The Tractatus de legibus et consuetudinibus regni Angliae is the earliest treatise on English law, commonly attributed to Ranulf de Glanvill and dated California, 1188. It was revolutionary in its systematic codification that defined legal process and introduced writs, innovations that have survived to the present day. It is considered a book of authority in English common law, written for Henry II as the culmination of his long struggle to return the kingdom to peace and prosperity following years of anarchy. The Tractatus is fairly described as the means to implement Henry's objectives. It would be supplanted as a primary source of English law by the De legibus et consuetudinibus Angliae of Henry de Bracton, which itself owes much of its heritage to the Tractatus. There has been debate over the actual author of all the parts of the Tractatus. The legal opinions of Glanvill's nephew, Hubert Walter, are certainly cited. Whatever the case, Glanvill perhaps supervised and certainly approved the work, and the issue is sidestepped in the literature by using terminology such as commonly attributed to Glanvill. Concepts and legacy. The treatise translates the Latin words homo and homines, later used in the Magna Carta, to mean free person, male or female, or libero homen tam masculo quam femin. In later English constitutional documentation, such as the English Bill of Rights and the United States Constitution, only the English word person is used, not the word man. Ancestry. Background. Norman law in England was a combination of Norman law in Normandy as modified to address perceived defects in it, inventions to address any problems unique to Norman control of England, and adaptations from the customs of the English when it suited Norman purposes. Also, a nascent but evolving feudalism had existed in England since the late 10th century. The legal system was initiated by William the Conqueror and fully in place in the time of Henry I, during which time English law evolved along its own path. That is the immediate provenance of the Tractatus, regardless of the ultimate origins of this Anglo-Norman law. Further, the author of the Tractatus was familiar with civil law and canon law, had long practical experience in the administration of justice, and was intimately aware of weaknesses in the system and how best they might be corrected. There seems to be consensus that the English law ultimately does not rely on earlier codifications. Scrutin noted the lack of a heritage owed to Roman law in the Tractatus, stating that some terminology was borrowed solely to be fitted into the book discussing contracts, but that the terms were applied to English concepts. Pollock and Maitland, in the history of English law before the time of Edward I, describe Glanvill's contracts as purely Germanic, and state that the law of Ernest is not from Roman influence. Context. By 1135, the evolution of Anglo-Norman law was showing its age, with some parts working acceptably but many parts being cumbersome, ineffectual, and vulnerable to opposition by local lords. The time of Stephen's reign was a disaster, known in English history as the Anarchy. Reform was needed and wanted, and Henry II was equal to the challenge. Henry brought order out of legal chaos. He made the King's Court a common court throughout England, carefully defining its jurisdiction and those of the Church, the Lords, and the Sheriff. He made it the guardian of the king's peace, with uniform protection for everyone. The Tractatus was the culmination of Henry's efforts, the means to implement his objectives. That this is attributable to legal evolution over his reign, rather than to sudden change, is shown by its purposeful inclusion of the principles of his earlier reforms such as the Assize of Clarendon, while some portions of the content of the Tractatus were first noted noted as exceptional innovations of Henry I. Henry II deserves credit for the revolution that made the innovations common rather than exceptional. Henry II is also noted for choosing strong and very capable men to implement his policies, and then giving them the latitude to do the jobs without interference. Among them was Glanvill, who was Chief Justiciar of England from 1180 to 1189, and who acted as regent in Henry's absence, which was often documented. In an age before widespread literacy and mechanical printing, it was common for all works, great and small, to borrow and copy from previous works without explicit attribution. The preface of the Tractatus is commonly described as an admiring imitation of the proemium to the Institutes of Justinian, with no negative implications of plagiarism. The preface to the Institutes begins Imperatorium Majestatem, but the preface to the Tractatus begins Regium Potestatem. The preface lays out the objectives, in effect saying that good laws and government are in the interests of justice, and these are the objectives of the king. The Tractatus consists of 14 books, and is largely confined to objects of jurisdiction in the Curia Regis. 14 books. These first 2 books treat the writ of right when originating in the Curia Regis, and all its stages. Taken with the 3rd book, the 3 together are a description of the proceedings in a writ of right for the recovery of land, including all the stages relating to the writ of right. These first 11 books dispense with actions commenced originally in the Curia Regis. Versions descent. Immediate impact. The use of writs limited the jurisdiction of all other courts and transferred jurisdictions of lord and county courts to the King's Court. The mechanics of the air were used for a new institution, where several counties were combined into a circuit and a judge was appointed to ride the circuit, bringing the King's Court to every part of the kingdom. The general unwillingness to grant continuances greatly reduced the time needed to complete judicial proceedings. The King's Court, through its writs, held ultimate jurisdiction in adversarial proceedings over real property, establishing the truth of facts through the rational process of an assize court was given as an alternative to the options of trial by ordeal, or the use of champions as substitutes, or the use of character testimonials rather than evidence to determine the outcome of legal contests. The emergence at this time of the doctrine of res judicata brought finality to the verdicts rendered, complementing the Tractatus though not a part of it, and serving to emphasize that the Tractatus was itself a part of Henry's reforms, but not the only part. Ecclesiastical courts retained jurisdiction over matters of marriage, legitimacy, wills, ecclesiastical issues, and redress for breach of ordinary contracts, but the writs of the King's Court prevented them from intruding elsewhere. The effect was unifying, and trial by jury in the King's Court was so popular that it deprived other courts of litigation. More important for the future of England, it was so satisfactory that it contributed to English culture by cultivating a universal respect for law and a willingness to abide by its decision. In legal history, the writs and processes of the King's Court, together with the judicial organization, are the germ of English common law. Similarly, the judicial oversight of property disputes through the use of writs of the germ for English land law. The option of the rational process of weighing evidence in a trial by jury would outlive all of its alternatives to become the only way to determine the truth of facts. Glanvill is cited copiously by name in books on English law, whether chronological histories or subject-oriented legal books, and in the latter where there are a number of references relevant to the topic at hand. He is cited as the earliest authority. Spelling variations of the name include Glanvill, Glanvill, and Glanvill. The Regium Majestatem The Scottish Regium Majestatum was written perhaps in the reign of Robert the Bruce but not earlier than 1318, as it includes a Scottish statute written in that year. Some two-thirds of it was adapted without change from chapters of the Tractatus, and some of the rest is different from the Tractatus but very similar to it. The remainder of the Regium Majestatum is unrelated to the Tractatus, and mostly covers the area of crimes.